So, this is a video just to explain my move from tropical astrology to sidereal astrology. So, as of January, late January 2025, I am moving from tropical astrology, and tropical astrology is probably the most popular form of astrology, and it has to do with where the signs are placed. So, in tropical astrology, the start of the astrological year is always with the equinox in March. That marks the start of Aries season. And it's a solar calendar because it's actually not based on where the stars are, surprisingly. It's based on the fact that the equinoxes and solstices mark the cardinal signs. So, to explain that, to break down the technical language there. So, the March equinox will determine that that is Aries, the start of Aries, which is around the 21st, 22nd of March. And then the solstice in June will mark Cancer season. The equinox in September marks Libra season, and the solstice in December marks Capricorn season. And then the rest of the signs fall within that, equally divided up to be about a month. They generally run in the tropical system from the 22nd or 21st of the month to the following month, 21st to 22nd. Now, thousands of years ago, I think it's around 2000 years ago, tropical and sidereal astrology were aligned. The March equinox happened when the sun was in the Aries constellation. But over 2000 years, the skies aren't static, just like nature. It moves. So it moves 1 degree backwards, the constellations do, because of the precession of the equinoxes, which is a whole other video we can talk about. And so the constellations started to move out of alignment with where tropical astrology was placing the equinoxes. And if we want to look at whether we're in the age of Aquarius, for instance, that has to do with whether that March equinox happens, what constellation it happens in. Now, it doesn't happen in Aquarius, and it won't happen in Aquarius constellation for about another 300 years. It's still happening in the Pisces constellation. And so, what I have chosen, and hopefully I'm not making this too complicated, I hope this makes sense, is to move from following tropical astrology, which doesn't align, like it's not actually where the constellations are in the sky, to sidereal astrology, which is you might think like astronomically correct astrology. Now, both systems work. I have used both systems very, very well in readings, and they both work. The reason I'm moving to sidereal is coming more from a place of being someone that looks at the night skies. And, when I see the moon in say like the Sagittarius constellation, but in tropical astrology we're saying it's in Capricorn because of that equinox bias, something feels off to me. Something doesn't feel right. And the readings I have done using sidereal astrology, which is astronomically correct, and why what it does is it throws the signs out by 24 degrees. So chances are, say your sun, if you're like me, so my sun is in tropical astrology is at 0 degrees of Gemini, which moves it to 6 degrees of Taurus in sidereal astrology. It will go back a sign, 24 degrees, because that's where the constellation actually is. Now, part of the reason for the move also has to do with the fact I'm in the Southern Hemisphere. And when I first started practicing astrology, like actually giving readings, I had a client and she asked me this really interesting question, and it's one I've been grappling with for a while. And she's from North America, where tropical astrology makes sense. That seasonal bias, like Aries season, the start of the astrological year is in spring. It's taking you into energy. Like Aries is all about fire, initiating seasonal energy, coming into summer. It really doesn't make that much sense in the Southern Hemisphere because we're going into winter. So the question that this client asked me was like, so if it's not actually where the constellation is, shouldn't it be reversed in the southern hemisphere? And this is something I've sat with for a really long time. And I've thought, yeah, like, I guess the start of the year in the southern hemisphere is actually the September equinox, which is the start of Libra season. It's not Aries season, and therefore maybe the sign should be reversed. Like all of this, like, so when the northern hemisphere is celebrating Aries season, maybe the southern should be celebrating Libra. Um, all of that. And it really sent me on a loop, and I didn't really do anything with it. I just spent some time like mulling it over and thinking about it and considering what felt right. Then in 2023, I spent a fair amount of time in India. And in India, there is a continuous lineage of astrology. So, unlike in the West, where there is a broken lineage of astrology thanks to monotheistic religion, even though most of the popes and high up church leaders had their own astrologers, it was like a big no-no to the general public. And so what happened was there was a lot of knowledge that was lost and wisdom that was lost from the ancient Greeks, which is being remembered now thanks to Hellenistic astrology. But when I was in India, it made me realize, hey, like here's this uninterrupted lineage. Astrology is still seen as a spiritual like a limb. It's a part of the Vedas. It's all about the study of light. It's called Jyotish, which is the study of light in India. And so they use the sidereal um, method of looking at the now the chart looks entirely different, but they use the sidereal method to underpin the design of the chart. And so anyway, it got me thinking about that a lot. And then as I was learning more and more and more, and practicing sidereal astrology with some Vedic influence using nakshatras, which are the original zodiac. Prior to there being 12 signs, there was actually 28 or 27, depending on what you look at. Um, and it got me really thinking like what works. So what happened in January of 2025 is I started doing one-on-one readings that had a larger sidereal and even Vedic focus to them. And what I found was that there was way more accuracy on my end. Now, like I said, both systems work. Go for whatever system feels right for you. The thing I noticed the most, and this was what happened to me in the move from tropical to sidereal, is where the ego comes up and what the ego has identified itself as. Like, I have been identifying myself as a Gemini for the longest time, and there is a lot of my identity wrapped up in that idea of like being a messenger and communicating and loving to read and loving to write. And then coming back to being a Taurus, I was a bit like, am I? Is that right? And it's a fun game for the ego, right? We get to see where we're attached, where we've created another identity for ourselves. But what I have found in the move from tropical to sidereal is then when we look at the nakshatras, the lunar mansions that sit within each sign, and like I said, they're the original zodiac, a lot of it starts to make sense. So you might have a lot of the traits of another sign, but your sun is in, say, Taurus. But my sun is aligned with a star which is all about searching, which gives me the Gemini energy still. So that's what I found. I found it's been really profound with looking at transits, and particularly when looking at planets entering a new sign because they're actually entering a new constellation. It's not an arbitrary part of the sky that they're moving into. I say all of that, and then at another level, there's a part of me. I remember when I used to work in marketing, I had an incredible mentor who said, like, all frameworks are helpful and all of them are wrong. No, some frameworks are helpful, but all frameworks are wrong. And so at the heart of it, this is something I think about a lot and I try and apply to what I do, which is like holding every framework loosely. And because every framework, it's trying to solidify the unmanifest, it's trying to solidify the divine. And ultimately, it can't be done. There's going to be flaws in every way in which we try and limit an unlimited world. And so that's what I keep in the back of my mind. Like, and that's why I would say, like, I'm not like if you still want a Western astrology or tropical astrology reading with me, I will absolutely do that for you. But I'm just finding that my like the big nudge and the big internal calling is to use sidereal, to use something that's astronomically correct, to connect us to the skies, to allow us to access ancient wisdom from Jyotish, from Vedic astrology, as well as from other astrology branches, um, and really bring that into this era in which we're living in. Anyway, so I hope that helps explain the shift. And yeah, and obviously just follow whatever you feel called to for how you look at your own astrology.